So another great resource of looking at South American art is to look at their burials. In a lot of ways, they're very similar to Egyptians, I always feel like, in this way, because, one of the great ways we know about Egyptian culture is through burials. And here in South America, it pretty much is the same idea. And a lot of these early cultures in South America didn't have any writing systems. So if you look at like the Siobhan de Huantar, the Nazca, right, they don't have any writing systems that are decipherable or even known to us. So, we have to sort of go with what we have, and that is the burial typically. So it helps us get insight into their culture. Now, one of the interesting things about their burials is that they showed wealth by burying people with textiles or cloth, basically. And on these textiles, you would often find, of course, what do you expect? Lots of zoomorphic imagery. So on the left, you have a very famous textile, and on the right, kind of a blow up of some of the detailed imagery you might see on them. Notice again, it's almost very similar to the Raimondi stele, where you have that almost like mask-like face, kind of fangs maybe, and kind of like this creature that seems kind of human but kind of animal all at the same time. That's a classic zoomorph. And then you have it patterned, of course, so it's usually, again, patterned through the image, through the textile to look like this kind of consistent imagery. But the way that they would show wealth, of course, is to bury the dead with as many textiles as they could afford. So, depending on your status, you would have very few or a ton, right, of textiles. So, when you look into some of these burials, you can tell that the person's wealthy by how many pieces of cloth, right, they were buried with. So, where the Egyptians might have focused on gold and gems and different things like that, here they're focusing on cloth. So it's just a different attitude about what you take to the afterlife and what it means. Um, the way that they dealt with their dead also was very interesting here in South America, where they use a mummification system, but not the same type of mummification system that the Egyptians use. The Egyptians mummified by placing the body into a salt mixture bath, basically. It was a natron bath, it was called. And they had to leave it in there for like 40 to 80 days to dry the body out. No, how they mummified here was much more interesting. They actually would sort of wrap the body up, you'll notice, into kind of a tight bundle, and then place the body out in the desert. And they let the natural desert air and the lack of humidity do its work. So the environment would literally just dry out these bodies and make them into these little husks, basically. And then when the body was dried out, then they could place it inside of a burial, place the grave goods, place different things there. Um, so again, it's a type of mummification, but different than you would see Egyptians doing, where the Egyptians were using salt. Here, they're just using the natural arid environment to mummify the bodies. And when someone's mummified, hair is often preserved, facial features, where you can actually kind of still see what the person looks like. So it's interesting to consider how mummification works in this way. We also know that South Americans were very interested in body manipulation by looking at their burials. Um, we know that they were manipulating like the size and the shape of heads and such. The way that you do this is when a child is very young, like just born. You would manipulate the head by placing boards on it or straps to it and such. And you'll notice in South America, kind of having an elongated skull was considered elegant and high ranking. You'll also see this when we look at Mayan culture. You'll notice they have like a very high forehead. That was something that was manipulated. So again, they would manipulate the body to make it look a certain way. They also manipulated the body by inlaying teeth with like gems and such, and gold and different things. So they would do different things to the body to make the body more beautiful in their opinion, or more stylized in their opinion. And a lot of this again was related to status and wealth. You also find a lot of burial pottery, right, in a lot of these burials as well. And some of it is zoomorphic, right? Some of it is not. Um, and we think that often that it was reflecting qualities or characteristics, right, of the person buried there. So for instance, these two pots here that have very zoomorphic qualities to them, is it saying that the person, was a good sailor, so they're like a fish, right? Or they were fleet of foot, they were a runner in their kingdom. We'll talk more about what runners were. They were message carriers, basically, in the Incan Empire. So, he's, a jaguar, slash, runner, person running, that kind of thing. So again, how they use animals might tell you a little bit about what the qualities of the person were. But I find these zoomorphs really fascinating and almost a little like frightening a little bit sometimes. And a lot of the burial pottery also had sexual imagery embraced in it, and it also, again, also often reminds me of Hindu culture a bit because of the tantric stuff and the different types of reliance on open sexuality in that culture. So you see that here, right, in these early South American cultures as well. Now you can look at really famous burials. I gave you some videos, of course, in your module, so I always recommend taking a look at those. And I always recommend like looking at the burial of the Lord of Sapon because he's a very famous one. And we're lucky we found this burial because it actually was being looted, and things were being probably stolen to put on the black market when the local police in this region found them doing it. If they had not come across them at that time, who knows what might have been lost right through the looting process. So we're lucky that this tomb was saved. And it's a very wealthy tomb, so we assume this was a very high-ranking South American during his time. And I love the image on the right because it sort of explodes the burial into layers, and it lets you look at all the different grave goods that he was buried with. So he was buried with these necklaces and different, textiles and headdresses and different kinds of things. So it gives you a sense of the kind of grave goods or ornamental objects, right, that these higher ranking people might have been buried with. On the left, the imagery there showed you some of the jewelry. They were very partial to ear plugs, as we call them. These very, very heavy plugs or earrings that they'd wear in their ears, usually made out of gold and turquoise and different types of precious materials. So again, just give you a sense of how wealthy this burial really was. And I'm often fascinated with how comfortable they are with burial and the dead. When I was in Peru, we went to Ollantaytambo, and today it's really very much a tourist town. A lot of their industry revolves around tourists. So they sell a lot of handicrafts and different things, artisan objects, and usually out of their own homes. So one of my favorite memories is sort of walking into these people's homes to look at like some textiles or some bent blankets or baskets or different kinds of things. And then realizing that, I'd look up and there would be this little altar with skulls on it. And I kept seeing this over and over again. So finally I asked in my bad Spanish, are these your ancestors? Are these your family? And people were like, yeah, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. So, do you think they watch over you or do they, advise you? And they were like, oh, yeah. So one of the things I found is that to them, the dead are very present in their lives and their ancestors especially. Then they feel very strongly connected to them. Where, for us to have a skull in our home, I definitely think that would be like a faux pas. Most people would not want to do that. Here, they're like, why wouldn't I want my family members to be close to me? So they literally deflesh the skulls, and then put them on the mantle, essentially, and feel that their ancestors can influence them or guide them, or, they can have some impact in their life. So I think that their relationship to the dead and to burial itself is a very unique type of attitude that almost has like a shamanistic or magical quality to it. That again, I don't think we would be present in our daily lives regarding burial in our ancestors. So just a fun story I like to tell you there.